Hello, welcome back to my channel. If you haven't been here before, I'm Jamie B. I read a ton of books. And this is my second reading update for March 2026, in which I'm going to be talking to you guys about some books I finished since my last update. So there'll be a lot of books and a lot of different topics, and we'll try to get through them without doing 8 hours of just talking about books, because it would be fun but exhausting. So first of all, we have books that I finished that I don't have in print. But I do have a lot of those. We're doing this, pieces of the month at a time, so it's at least not like 50 books all in one video, but there are a few. The most recent one that I finished is actually the first in a project in which I'm trying to read down my ARC collection. So the other night, I had everyone that was in the reading sprint chats that I was hanging out in give me numbers between 1 and 33, because at that time I had 33 pages of ARCs on NetGalley. Yes, 33. And for each number, in the order that I was given them in the chat, I went through to the page number and looked in the list of books on that page. There's 20 per page, I think. And picked one that would go with that number. So kind of mood reading. I didn't have to pick the top one or whatever. But at the same time, taking some of the randomness out of that decision. So the first one I got was page 28. And the book I picked for that was We Would Have Told Each Other Everything by Judith Herrmann. This is translated from the German by Katie... Oh, can I read it from there? Probably not. By Katie Derbyshire. This is, according to Storygraph, a series of 3 interconnected stories. I didn't really catch the distinction reading it in the ARC format that I had. And I did read it with my eyeballs because I only have e-ARCs from NetGalley. At the moment, the e-audiobooks that they have, the ALCs, I can't open them with my current computer setup. So all my ARCs are read with eyeballs. This one, I didn't expect to enjoy it as much as I did. It was a 5-star. It was very good. It also was fun because for the first while, I was like, maybe I'm just over analyzing or connecting things that are just me. But there were all these little things like, this reminds me of Steppenwolf by Hermann Hesse. And the further I got into it, it's not a retelling of Steppenwolf, but there are a lot of nods to Steppenwolf, including a very strong wolf imagery. And there's a lot of psychoanalysis and dreamy elements and that are very much Steppenwolf. So I actually put on Steppenwolf as my audiobook to go to bed to the other night after I finished this book, just to remind myself of what that story is about. And yeah, it's not like she's recreating Steppenwolf, but if you haven't read Steppenwolf yet and you want to, maybe read it before you read We Would Have Told Each Other Everything, because I think you'll get a kick out of where those references are. There's other references that reminded me of other German literature, but that one really was a strong link in this book. And that's still just me figuring it out while I was reading. I'm terrible at symbolism. What do all those symbols mean? I had a class way back when I was studying German literature in undergrad, and in class, yeah, I could be like, okay, I'll bet that this is a symbol for this thing, and like, I'm so bad at that. That's where my autism, before I knew that I was autistic, that would have been a clue. I am terrible at symbolism. Ugh. So, I don't know what all of it means, but yeah, it's definitely alluding between the two. And, it's not exactly a surprise that someone with the name Judith Hermann would be referencing Hermann Hesse, since she's writing in the German literary tradition to begin with. It's not a stretch. It's still just me going out on a limb making this connection. So take it for what it is, but I think the combination would be fun to read. And I would recommend Steppenwolf by Hermann Hesse anyway. It's kind of fun. Not my favorite by him. My favorite is still Der Glasperlenspiel or Das Glasperlenspiel. I don't remember what the title ended up with for the article. Glasperlenspiel, glass bead game. In English, it's translated the glass bead game, or they gave it another English title, Magister Ludi, which I don't like nearly as much. We're not that dumb. We can probably figure out the glass bead game from the German title. I don't know why they thought they needed to give it a different title, since the whole game is the point of the book. So, anyway. Off on a tangent. This is what happens when I'm reading interesting books. So that one was the one I just finished. The one I read before that, Voices in the Air, was by Kasia Jurancic. I think it's in translation. Maybe. So Voices in the Air is about several families that... it doesn't say it's in translation. It is in English. It's about several families that hijack a Polish passenger plane going from Breslau to Warsaw so that they can land in West Germany instead and defect from Poland in the communist era following World War II in Poland. These are people whose families survived World War II and all of the horrors of being under German occupation during World War II. And then they come out the other end of that into the communist regime that promised all sorts of great things and then didn't deliver and turned into a nightmare with secret police and just horrible stuff. So there was this period where everybody was enthusiastic, and you see that in this story. And then they start realizing what their regime is actually turning into. And then it's not working. They're struggling. And they decide the best way to survive is to get out. And some of them need to get out because the secret police is involved and they need to leave before they get arrested. But not all of them. And not all of them are happy that they end up on the other side of the dividing line between the communist bloc and everybody else. And of course, Poland doesn't stay under that communist regime forever. So once they're out, they can't necessarily go back, especially if they're considered criminals when they left. It's not like their record is expunged once the communists leave. So it's a really interesting book. I think it's one that would do better with more marketing, because I've not met anyone yet who is reading this book. But it was really good, and I definitely enjoyed it. It's the second book I've read this month about Polish people after World War II. So that seems like a mini theme that's been going on in the last 2 weeks. Anyway, that was Voices in the Air by Kasia Juronsik. And it is also a book that I read as an ARC off NetGalley. And I think I gave it a 4.5 stars. Yeah, 4.5. So it was good, and it was a little hard to stay in mentally because of the format in part of it. Because part of it's told through interviews. One of the main characters that escapes on this plane is also a journalist, and when she's struggling later on in her life outside of Poland, she puts together a story about this hijacking as a way to try to get herself back into being a journalist professionally. So we're following those interviews for part of the storytelling, which is a great idea. It's just it didn't hang together quite as well as I needed it to, and so it kind of bogged down. But it could have been a lot worse. I did enjoy it. All right, and the one I finished before that, the book I finished before that, was actually one that I have in print, but also found the audiobook for. So let me put my coffee down. My coffee. This is my favorite mug, by the way. So I know last year I was focused on mugs, and this is one of the ones I got. I'm going to put my coffee down and grab the book so I can talk with a book in my hands for this one. All right. So I got the audiobook off of our library's Hoopla for this book that I also got in print from the bookstore that I was working at up until this month, actually. So this is also set in Poland during and after World War II. So did not plan it that way, just that's the theme, apparently. This one is following survivors as they're going through the things they survive, and then afterwards, and dealing with survivor's guilt, and how do you put together a life for yourself after surviving being Holocaust victims in some way or another. Some of them go through camps and some don't. But these are Jewish Polish people. The characters in Voices in the Air are, I don't think any of them are Jewish. I think they're all the non-Jewish Poles that also survived. And I think it was Lily Tuck. I think it was her book that was really talking about what happened with the Poles, and that when Poland was invaded in World War II, that you didn't need to be Jewish to be put in camps in Poland. That the Germans really had something against the Poles as Poles. They wanted to have the land and get rid of the Poles that were, occupying it. Which is not a part of that history that you normally see much of, because it's mostly just the Holocaust, which usually is the shorthand for the Jewish victims of the German occupation and the German program to purify the race that they think needs to occupy those lands. So these books read together give you a much broader picture of what's going on for Polish people during and after World War II. And actually, they made a really good pairing. Both are excellent. And I definitely recommend both books. Maybe put something in between them if it's a bit too heavy a topic, because they are both very heavy topics. We Were the Lucky Ones is more heavy. I obviously the challenges of being in a family that is Jewish going through the Holocaust era in Poland are going to be a bit more than just dealing with food shortages and secret police in communist Poland, but neither one is having a great time, just to say the least. And neither one of these books puts you in a camp in that perspective. Those get heavy really fast. And I did not actually read one of those this month. Doesn't mean I won't. There are a lot of books that are set in that time period and that setting, and I do gravitate towards them, just not now. So, anyway, I definitely recommend this one, and obviously if I got it from the part of Hoopla that is the Flex system, where you can access the books up to 10 at a time through our library, and when you turn one in, then you can check another one out once you get to that 10, instead of having just 10 total for the month, which is the other system. So if they're on there, then they're usually either in high demand or being promoted for some reason, or they're actually just brand new. So I would imagine this is something that other libraries are also featuring in some way or another, for it to be in that part of their system. So if you see it and it looks interesting, I do definitely recommend that this is a really good book. And it, deals with a lot of things that are relevant to other survivors of conflict as well. We have a lot of immigrants showing up in the United States from countries that have gone through horrible, horrible stuff. And it's hard to imagine going through all that and then landing in a place where nobody is even thinking about those conflicts or those challenges. And your perspective and their perspective are so different that, you were, just trying to survive where you came from, and now all of a sudden it's just calm and everyone's just worrying about gas prices. It's quite a bit different. So it's a good perspective to have when thinking about what it's like to be a Haitian refugee right now. If you're here having just escaped an area that is pretty much lawless at this point. I don't know what's going on in Haiti at the moment, but last I checked in a week or two ago, it looked like the government really had very little control over the violence and the gang takeovers of territory in Haiti. And it sounded miserable to be, just a random person on the ground there. So that was one conflict that came to mind while I was reading this, was okay, so you come out of that and you land in Florida or Texas, and all of a sudden, gangs are not controlling where you're at. We complain about gang violence, but it means that there's violence at all. They're shooting somebody that's also a part of their gang or a member of the rival gang, but it's not like they're taking over the entire city. Our scale of violence that we complain about is way different. Anyway, so bit of a tangent, but that's one of the things that came to mind reading this book as real world relevancy to this story that goes beyond the specifics of the Holocaust era of World War II. So, anyway, this was really good. Moving on to the next book. The book I finished before We Were the Lucky Ones was what I did not like as much. It is called Brood by Jackie Polson. It's about a couple in Minnesota that have chickens. That is the story. That they get chickens. And they have chickens in their yard. And they have a coop for them. And it's heated and it has light. And they figure out how to feed them. and they figure out that what they're feeding them is maybe not the best diet. They adjust the diet. And then they lose one of the chickens because it gets too cold. And if they lose another one of the chickens, just it dies. They do that. And they don't really know what died. And then it gets cold. And it gets colder. And then at some point, they find out that they have somewhere else they're going to want to be, that they can't bring the chickens. And okay, that's great. It's told in little, very, very short, like James Patterson-esque short chapters. And with all the emphasis on the short memory and short attention span of a chicken, I felt like if I was a chicken, I would love this book. Because my attention span and my memory would be about right for the way this book is told. I, not being a chicken, was bored. So, yeah, it is the sort of book that if you find the idea of having backyard birds like a cozy idea, and you just want something mindless to just, kind of meditate on having backyard birds, or if you have backyard birds, it would be the sort of book that would be good for like the equivalent of having a conversation with somebody about having backyard birds. I don't have backyard birds, and I'm not sure I would be that obsessed. I don't know. I have relatives that have backyard birds, and we don't have conversations that would be the equivalent to this book. So, but I do have kittens, and that's why I was thinking, like, if I had birds and I was chatting with someone else who had birds, it'd be kind of like this book. Because when I'm talking with other people that do kitten rescue, we talk about some of the tedious stuff that would be the equivalent to this book. So anyway, for me, it was a very boring book. It was like 2.5 on Storygraph. So I don't usually go much lower than that and actually finish the book. But I loved the cover. That's what I picked it up for from our Bag of Books sale. I am no longer volunteering at the Friends of the Library store where I've been volunteering. I'm getting too close to setting up my own bookstore to keep going with that volunteering thing. It was just committing to 3 days a week that I would have to be there, and also being available for random meetings and things that I need to do. It just wasn't working anymore. And it was slightly uncomfortable from a conflict of interest perspective, although I think that was more manufactured by certain people I didn't get along with anyway. But it would have been increasingly uncomfortable and awkward for me from just a scheduling perspective. So I stayed through the end of our Bag of Books spring sale. I'm trained to do all this stuff. So, ditching them right before a big event would be just rude. So I stayed through the end of that event, did all 3 days of it, and, all day, all 3 days. It was fun. And I did get 2 bags plus kind of half a bag, and my sister got 5 bags and sort of half a bag, and then we got 8 bags total. And I don't have them all here, so as far as doing a book haul video, I do have some of them still stacked up that are, separated out, but I don't have all the books because a lot of them went to my sister's place, and yeah, so I may or may not do a specific haul video, but I might do a highlights video. We'll see how I'm feeling about that. Once I get all the videos that I know I'm supposed to do done, see where I'm at. But anyway, that's where I got Brood, and I finished it within days of the sale, so that was pretty good. And then I actually did finish one other one that I got during the sale. So it'll be in this video, but not quite yet. So the book I finished before Brood was a library book, Western Lane by Chetna Maru. This book is about a Jain family. They are, I'll double check where they're at. Does it say where they're at on the back of the book? Does it say where they're at all? Anyway, so it's a Jain family that has gone through a family trauma. And they're really struggling to deal with it all. And the father is told that his kids need something to distract them from their trauma and something to be busy doing. So that's what they end up, getting involved in squash for. Not because they're particularly into squash, although they have a family member. One of those, the family member that everybody talks about, that's almost a legend. And they actually have VHS video of this family member playing their great squash games. So squash is not just a total accident that they end up playing it. And one of the kids turns out to be really good, and ends up training to be in a tournament, which is great. But the Jain tradition is still a rather patriarchal tradition in which women are really not supposed to be playing sports in tournaments, certainly not dressed accordingly for playing those sports in a tournament. And the father and the immediate family, they're not super concerned about traditionalism, and they never really were. They're still Jain. They're not giving up their religion, but they're not so fixated on their religion that they can't also be modern. And it's a constant balancing act, and anyone in a religion that's restrictive like that knows what that is like. I mean, I grew up Seventh-day Adventist as a child, and it's a balancing act between what your church says and what real life in the society that you live in does. So they're dealing with that. They are, yes, in Britain. And they spend some time in Scotland. So I think the uncle and aunt live in Edinburgh. Anyway, so it ends up being the squash game and the squash tournament versus the traditional expression of Jainism. And it's done rather well. I know some of my friends in BookTube land found it boring. But look at how skinny this book is. It's not like an epic novel. It is very short, but does manage to get a reader like myself that does not do sports to actually care about this squash tournament that this girl is wanting to play in. This is really just about a kid that's playing squash and may or may not get to play the tournament, and that's all it is. It's really good. I liked it. According to Storygraph, I gave it a 4.25. So it could have been better. I do see where the verdict that it was boring comes from, and what I found missing in it. So I studied Indian region cultures when I was in art school, because I took some classes on the art from that region. So I have kind of an understanding of the Jain religion, but not recently, and not to the extent where I would know why things in this story would or would not be acceptable within their faith. And there's not a lot to flesh out what it means that this family is from that tradition. I felt like there needed to be a little bit more explanation for the reader, who's probably not Jain. It's not a very big population. Worldwide, the number of people in that religion is not very great. So just statistically, it's more likely that the reader is not going to know what that means. And I found that to be something where it could almost just have been a placeholder for whatever patriarchal religion you are familiar with, instead of being a very specific religion, which is why they eat so much lentils and rice, because they are vegetarian. But lacto-ovo-vegetarian, as far as they're eating in this book, that's something where I wasn't sure if that was traditional versus less traditional, because I could have sworn they're not supposed to eat eggs. But then I think that's something where they probably have reasons both directions. But coming from a religion that was also vegetarian by religion, there's ways to explain it depending on what's going to work for your family. But I would have liked more explanation about that. There's a lot of talk of food. This one and Taiwan Travelogue, which I'll talk about in just a bit, talk about food a lot. I spent a while being very hungry for food I did not have the stuff to make, which is very sad. I actually do have lentils, though. So lentils are something I'm going to be cooking this weekend, probably because of this book. That's dal. So anyway, that would have been a great time to talk more about the background of the religion that this family practices. So, you might want to read Wikipedia about what it means to be Jain when you read this book. But I do recommend it. It was a good book. I enjoyed it. I don't know if I would give it the winning placement on a book prize, but I could see why it ended up being shortlisted for stuff. It was good. Then before that, I actually finished another arc, Saving the Fire by Itamar Vieira Jr. This is book 2 in the Trilogia de Terra. This is a trilogy of books set in the rainforesty forest area in, I think, Brazil. Pretty sure it's Brazil. And they're in an area that was occupied for centuries before Europeans showed up. These families had been there, living their lives, doing their thing, for a long time before anybody from Europe showed up and started trying to push their weight around. And then the church shows up, the church being the Roman Catholic Church. They show up and decide that all the land is theirs and start demanding rent. So we're in a village that has been occupied by the Roman Catholic Church, and they're still in the process of being taken over by European ways of doing things. And I would imagine reading this book and Crooked Plow, which is book 1 in this trilogy, that this is a process that's still going on, and that depending on what village you're in South America, that these kinds of stories are happening quite a lot still. And just thinking about some of the small towns where I'm at in my part of the United States, and all of our small towns are recent in development. The the people that were here before the Europeans showed up here weren't doing small towns, European style settlement. But even then, if you get in a small town, things that happened quite a while ago and societal things that were the norm way back when, 40 years, 50 years, 60 years ago, that is still something that they're dealing with, depending on the small town you go to. So, not a surprise. And I've read other literary fiction books set in small towns in other countries from Central America south, where the conditions in those towns and the stories that they're dealing with feel like you've gone back a couple centuries. So I found that really interesting. Kind of, dissociates the reader from the present into this sort of nebulous time, because it's so hard to place the stuff going on in the story with modern life. But at the same time, when they get to the city, which they do in this one, it's a modern enough city that it's basically modern life in the city. It's just not modern life in the village. So, yeah. Anyway, and the one I read before that was Taiwan Travelogue, which I mentioned earlier in this video. Taiwan Travelogue also was I think Booker, maybe National Book Award, maybe both nominee. I think so. It's been on several prize lists anyway, and one of them at least. I'm so bad at remembering these things. Anyway, Taiwan Travelogue by Yang Shuangzi. This is about a woman from Nagasaki in 1938. So thinking of our World War II history, 1938, Japan is occupying at least part of China. And there's still violence going on in parts of China at this time. When Japan is defeated at the end of World War II, obviously Japan is no longer occupying China, and then we get to the resumption of the civil war between the Maoist side and the non-communist side that the U.S. was backing, and then you get the Civil War, and then you get Mao, and so on in China. Which all that is kind of background to situate where this book sits, because when we think Taiwan now, we think Taiwan versus China. And in 1938, China is partially occupied. I don't think most of China would accept that China was entirely occupied. They might take exception to Japan being all that successful. But this is a Japanese woman who in this story is described as being from the mainland, which is interesting because I don't think of Nagasaki as mainland. I'm usually, when I think mainland in that part of Asia, I'm thinking China or something else that's on the mainland of the continent. So I got thrown off by that, by the constant reference to the mainland for this lady. But she's speaking Japanese. I'm so confused. And she's visiting the colony of Taiwan. Hold on. All right. All right, so Saving the Fire, I can see why it was. All right, so before Western Lane, I finished Saving the Fire by Itamar Vieira Jr. This is book 2 in the Trilogia de Terra, the Trilogy of Earth. It is set in Brazil, and is about an area that was occupied continuously by people just living their lives and passing on the land to the next generation and doing just fine for centuries before the Roman Catholic Church showed up and decided all the land was theirs and started charging rent. So now we're in a modern era in a village where there's still a lot of people that they can't read. They're just carrying on the tradition that they've been handed down from previous generations. And they pay the rent because otherwise bad things happen. But they are not really connected in with the modern world. And some of their younger family members do leave and find a more modern lifestyle. But there's this dichotomy between the people that live in the village and the people that don't. And we're kind of nearing the end of an era where the church is no longer really in charge. And there's new business people that are taking over control of these areas. So in this book, we're seeing this shift in power and what that looks like from the perspective of these villagers that are, just dealing with everyday stuff. But that everyday stuff is kind of colored by what's going on outside of their village. And there is some sexual violence in this one. So if you are concerned about trigger warnings for such things, there would be some appropriate trigger warnings for this book. I try not to read trigger warnings because I don't like the spoilers. But yeah, it's a bit raw in some places, but it's a really good book. This is the same author that wrote Crooked Plow. That's book 1 in this trilogy. I don't know if any of the characters carry over from one to the next. I'm not sure it's that kind of trilogy. It's been long enough since I read Crooked Plow that I don't remember. There is a similarity in that in both of these books, there's a child to whom something happens in childhood that sets them apart in some way from everybody around them. So I'm curious to see if book 3 is going to do that same structure. Because in Crooked Plow, the story starts out with the girls playing with a sharp object, and I think it was a pair of sewing scissors, something like that. And one of them loses their tongue, which, if you are thinking about reading the trilogy in order and you find that kind of thing triggering, fair warning. I don't like things done to tongues, and I don't like things done to eyeballs. And so yeah, that's one where I was like, I could have done without that page. It's not super graphic, but just knowing that it happens is graphic enough. Ew. But it sets up for the entire rest of the story. You can't just skip it very well. Anyway, so I'm curious to see what Junior does with book 3. So far, both books have been great, and I won't be at all surprised if I see Saving the Fire on prize lists, especially since Crooked Plow was nominated for things. And I think this is at least as good as Crooked Plow. So that's Saving the Fire. That one I read as an ARC from NetGalley. I've been trying to whittle away some of the ones that I was excited I got. Now I need to actually read them. Yay. The one before it, I think I did actually request it on NetGalley. I don't remember for sure, but I could have sworn it was one that that I got through NetGalley, or that I would. I could have sworn that I saw it on NetGalley and requested it, but I know I didn't get it. So there are quite a few of those, and everybody gets turned down for NetGalley arcs. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Anyway, Taiwan Travelogue by Yang Shuangzi. This is about a woman from Nagasaki in 1938. She is traveling to Taiwan, which is a colony. So it was a bit disorienting. I was expecting when she started talking to people in Taiwan about there being in a colony, I was expecting them to be insulted or angry, because I didn't really catch on early about the setting, the specificity of it being 1938. Because usually modern day, I think Taiwan versus China. And Taiwan being a breakaway colony that determined itself to be a country when they left communist China. But this is before that by a bit. And at this point, Japan is occupying parts of China before World War II. Because, of course, Japan doesn't have a lot of arable land, and it's hard to grow rice or anything else you want to be growing on arable land on islands that are predominantly volcanic, mountainous terrain. So that's been a recurring conflict between Japan and China, and the most recent iteration of that was before World War II, where Japan, and I'm going to forget which year this happened, but Japan invaded China. There was a very historic massacre and a lot of atrocities by Japan on the Chinese people. And it's the sort of graphic setting that makes for really heavy books. I've read a few novels set in that era, and they require a lot of self-care. So that's going on mainland China. In this book, the woman is from Nagasaki, so she's coming from Japan. She's described as being from the mainland, which threw me off because I always think mainland being continental Asia, so like China. But no, she's from Japan. And she's a travel writer who's really obsessed with food. She's very happy and very perky and positive, and I have friends like her. I totally saw her in some of my friends anyway. But she's traveling around very much like No Reservations, the show Anthony Bourdain did. She's traveling around and trying out local cuisine and writing about it and writing about her travels. Very much like a blogger, but before the internet. And she's very much a colonizer mentality towards Taiwan. But she doesn't think of herself that way. She thinks of herself as being very open-minded and very positive about Taiwan. But it's always through a lens of Taiwan being a lesser, less civilized, developing space that can't possibly have culture of its own worth acknowledging. So that's an issue that keeps coming up. And that's one of the themes that gets dealt with in this book. So it's very good. I enjoyed it. I believe it was a 5-star book from me. Maybe 4.75. I think that's one where I'm going to have to revisit at the end of the month, like which ones get 5 and which ones stay at 4.75. because sometimes that's just, was I too tired to rate things 5 at the time. I'm leaning towards 5 stars, so that one might be a 5-star book. So I highly recommend it. I don't have it in print. That one's one I got as an audiobook from the library, but it's one that I will probably retain a copy of it eventually. I haven't seen one in print yet. It hadn't gone through the bookstore while I was volunteering there anyway. So it's still too new for that for my area. Anyway, before that, I finished White Cat, Black Dog by Kelly Link. This is a short story collection. They are short stories based around traditional fairy tales. So not necessarily your traditional fairy tales, but if you've read the Andrew Lang fairy books, the Color Fairy series, I think all of the base stories for this series, or for this collection, are in there. I recognize the structures of all the stories. Some of them are better than others. I think one of them I really didn't see much point to, which would be part of how the collection is not a 5-star collection. But it's still really good. I enjoyed it. And it's got some great imagery. So if you like fairy tales and you want some short stories, White Cat, Black Dog. It does have a white cat and a black dog in different stories. And it's a library book. Yay! So I finished a library book that gets to go away. So I'll show you guys one more, and then break this video and do a second video so it doesn't get too long. So let me grab the last book I'm going to show in this video. Alright. I read it. I read A Court of Thorns and Roses. Alright, here it is. I read A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. I know, I make it sound like that's a huge accomplishment. First book in a series, usually referred to by the same name, or ACOTAR for short. Fantasy series with sexy bits on page. Sort of romantasy before romantasy was really a term that I'd heard anyone use. So, early romantasy. It's very, very YA. It's my first take on it. Oh my gosh, the main character is so teenager. And I'm so not. So, I had a hard time relating to the main character. I never really did connect with her. She's annoying. She murders someone. Granted, not a human someone, but still, she murders someone. And instead of being punished for this murder, she gets to go and live in a castle and wear pretty clothes and get fed really good food. And, this is way better than what she should have been expecting, having just committed a murder. Seriously? Oh my gosh. So, I never really did have much sympathy for her, and it didn't get enough better from that perspective for the entire book. I loved the world building. So, yes, I am reading the next book. I don't know if I'm going to read it with audiobook or with eyeballs, because I did kind of both on this one, but mostly audiobook. I have behind me, on that shelf behind me, I have book 2. Mist and Fury, I think it's book 2. So I have it, borrowing this and this one, and I think the next 2 after that, from my housemate. So I have them to read with my eyeballs. I'm thinking maybe I might like it slightly more if I'm just reading it without the audiobook, because when I see that it's getting to sexy bits, I can skip it. Because you can't do that very well in an audiobook because you don't know when to stop skipping ahead. So I might try it with eyeballs and see if I like it more. But it is fatter. So I don't know. I haven't decided yet. I can't check out anything more on Hoopla until next month unless I can get the Flex copy, which right now I have on hold. And unless I get it before the end of the month, I'm getting it at the end of the month anyway. So, yeah. So I am diving into ACOTAR. There is a Sarah J. Maas read-along thing going on that's hosted by Jessica Kiwi and Jen. I don't remember what her channel name is. I'll put them in the description if you want to join in on that. They were reading Assassin's Blade, I think, this past week. So it gives you some idea, if you know the series, where they're at. But I will catch up. I just need to not use up all my checkouts before I get the books. So, yeah. So if you want to join in on that, that's still going on. They're not going too fast through them. So if you want to catch up or just dive in where they're at, if you're doing a reread, yeah, the more the merrier. And they do sprints for this read along every week. So, yeah, I'll put that in the description. And then I'm going to do the rest of this wrap up in a second video, so part 2, so I don't have to truncate my chatting about the books that I've been talking about. So I will catch you guys in part 2 in just a bit. Talk to you soon. Bye!